Hi, I'm Billy. And welcome to Jack of Traits. If you have been following this tutorial, you might have already realized that Laravel 8 heavily uses Tailwind CSS as a big part of its framework UI design scaffold. So in this video, we will take a step back to appreciate the power of Tailwind CSS and get the real reason why you should be using it in your web projects. I know I commented on how colossal the markups get when using Tailwind, and I still think they are. But it doesn't hide the fact that Tailwind might be the CSS framework you're looking for. Just this time, give Tailwind a chance, and I'm pretty sure you will be happy that you did. And without further ado, let's jump right into it. Before we jump into understanding the Tailwind CSS, let's go ahead and add browser sync in our Laravel project. If you are tired of having to refresh your Laravel project every time you change something in your blade file in CSS, then the browser sync npm package is for you. Open your webpack.config.js file located in the very root of your Laravel app folder and add this line at the end of your mix function. After you've done that, type in npm run dev to your terminal and hit enter. If you haven't got the browser sync package yet in your node modules, Laravel will install it for you. In our case, we haven't installed the package yet, so we will be running the npm run dev command 2 times. What this does is that it compiles all your CSS and JavaScript files. After that, run php artisan serve to start your local server. And then, open up another terminal and run the command npm run watch. Open up localhost 3000 as what it has instructed. Now, if you change something on your blade file, you should see that the browser automatically reloads. Now that we have that prepared, let's go ahead and type in the markups that we will use in this video to understand and emphasize how awesome Tailwind is. Note that what I am going to show you won't cover everything that Tailwind has to offer. But I believe that this example would be enough to encourage you to use the Tailwind CSS. And since Laravel 8 uses Tailwind as the default CSS, and since we will also be spending our time improving our front end, I think it is an excellent idea that we start getting to know Tailwind. To make it simpler for us, let's enclose everything with the div element. In this example, we will be merely wrapping our title, content, and image HTML elements because we will add the Tailwind CSS in our div class attribute later. And when you go to the documentation of the Tailwind CSS on their website, you will see that Tailwind follows the concept of utility-first approach. To explain it simply, every CSS style is broken down into tiny pieces of an individual class selector to control the styling on each element. Don't worry if this doesn't make any sense to you at this point. We will be using prominent examples when we add the Tailwind CSS class names later, and you will see the pattern. For example, when we want to add a simple border to our markup, we add this class name. I know that's pretty basic for you, but how about we add padding? There are a lot of variations when working with Tailwind. Usually, you just type in the first letter, then add a dash symbol, then a number. This is only one example, but this is a very prominent pattern in the Tailwind utilities. Most of them are the shorter version of the CSS style's actual name, like P for padding, M for margin, BG for background, etc. If you notice, we simply type in the word P-5 here. With this approach, We usually don't have to write CSS anymore when working with Tailwind because we can simply add class names to our markup every time we wanted to change something to the markup style. I know there's a lot to memorize when working with Tailwind. But when you realize the Tailwind's class name pattern, it's straightforward to drive around with it. As you can see, we can also add a font color like so. When you look at the documentation, you will notice that the higher the number, the darker the color becomes. Let us also add a background color like so. Still, you can see the obvious pattern of the naming convention of the Tailwind utilities. This also helps because you can quickly memorize the class names. Let us make the text alignment of the content to the center. This is what I really love about Tailwind, it provides you with much flexibility. We can also control the font size like so. When working with basic HTML and CSS, everything is already set to the mobile view by default. Because of this, Tailwind utilizes this fact and prepares your UI by making it mobile ready. If you notice, when dealing with mobile views, everything is much simpler because all the UI elements will always be stacked up from top to bottom. That is why you will notice that we are already designing our UI for the mobile view. The next thing that we will talk about is Tailwind variants. There are lots of Tailwind variants like responsive, hover, focus, and much more. But today, we will just tackle the responsive variants. With the responsive variants, you can add a specific media query for a particular style of CSS. This is the most common thing that we will always have to do when we wanted our UI to adjust depending on the screen size. We can apply a particular CSS style to a specific breakpoint. As you can see, even if we make the screen's width bigger, we still have our elements stack up on top of each other. To have an easy example of using the Tailwind variants, let's start with the SM class name. To make it simple, let's just change the title's background color when the minimum screen size is 640 pixels. So you type in SM : and the class name. In this case, we are setting the background color to blue when the screen size reaches a minimum of 640 pixels. Now, let's go ahead and change something again when we reach the 768 pixels width. With these examples, you can already picture out what happens next. The responsive variant is one of my favorites when working with Tailwind CSS. This really shows how flexible Tailwind is. Let's go all the way up the highest screen width. Notice that content text and the image still stack up on top of each other even on a large screen size. The easiest way to do this is that we apply flex style on a large screen like so. As you can see, we adjust the two div elements to be lined up to each other. Let's also change the text alignment to the left when the screen size reaches the minimum width of 640 pixels like so. We can also control the width of our markup like so. By doing this, we can ensure that our markup occupies half of the screen. There is also another width screen size set up when you refer to the documentation, of course. Now, let's focus on the image div container. When we add a background to the div element, you will notice that it doesn't take up the other half of the screen. So let's go ahead and also add the width 1/2 class name like so. That is pretty amazing. At this point, you should be able to appreciate the power of Tailwind's flexibility. There are the last things that we needed to focus, and that is the image. As you can see, the image that we just put in is smaller than our container's width and height. What I wanted to do is to make the image take up the whole container size. Let's go ahead and add the w-full class name to make our image take up the container div's entire width. But there is another problem when we go to the larger screen. There's a problem with the height. So let's add in the h-full class name so that our image occupies the div container depending on our div element's height. We also need the image to fit perfectly inside our div container. So we will also add the object cover class name to do the job. Let's also add the object center to ensure that our image will default to the center. Now, we have a simple HTML view that applies the modern web UI standard practices. And using Tailwind, we can easily customize the CSS styles depending on how we wanted them to be. So I hope you find this video comprehensive enough to get started with Tailwind CSS. In future videos, I will list some of the typical Tailwind component UI using the utilities you can use with your projects. Today is just a very brief introduction to how we can manipulate your CSS using Tailwind. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, comment, share, and subscribe if you're new to this channel. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll get notified whenever a new video is up. Stay tuned, and see you in the next video.